Once again, leading off today's video by saying a big thank you to everyone who has joined us over the Florida Maquis Patreon channel. What's the difference between the Patreon channel and the YouTube channel? Well, here at YouTube, they make everyone censor themselves. Everything has to be PG-13. You can't speak about things in a way that's honest. You can't speak about things in a way that might even be a little graphic to get the point across. You always have to make it as if children are in the room always. And that doesn't solve problems. What solves problems is when you send the kids to bed and you talk about things like adults. And we're starting to see evidence of this now starting to destroy U.S. culture. Because something's happening that not a lot of people are seeing. It's only $1 US per month, even less if you sign up for an entire year. Fully refundable within the first 90 days. Lowest allowable level. Would love to have you guys over here. There's something going on right now. The statistics are proving it that I just think is going to shock everyone. And we're going to try to cover it a little bit in today's video. Here, just in a very, like I said, PG-13 way. But the truth is the truth. And it really does depend on your perspective. I've always loved this image because depending on light and depending on angle, you could see a blue circle or an orange square. Now, back in 2019, I did a video talking about, and this is, of course, the map videos. When things get bad in this country, what are governments going to do? Well, they're going to find ways to cut back on spending on unnecessary things. And to them, unnecessary things is protecting you. Even the Patriot nurses alluded to this now, years later. Unnecessary things to the government's protecting you. They don't care about you. I mean, they've never really cared about you, but now it's about the money. And I made the allegation that when things got bad, the places with the most money would unfortunately be the safest. The places with the least would be the most dangerous. Because when they start to release prisoners en masse to save money, these guys are going to get as far away from anywhere where they would have to encounter law enforcement as possible. And that's right out here in the middle. And there's a reason, by the way, people even have the ability to live out here in the middle in Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, the Dakotas, without being farmers. It's called socialism. Now, I'm sure people are already mad. They're already typing, oh, you said the S word, Maquis. Well, let me give you my point. Let me show you history. How many people know what this is? Well, of course, Maquis, that's the interstate system. Do you know what it's technically called? The National Interstate and Defense Highway System. See, it was created in 1956. And you didn't get to live out here in the middle of nowhere without being a farmer, without being a homesteader, without it. You couldn't have a home prior to 1956 out here in the middle of nowhere unless you were on a working farm that had the ability to largely support itself with only very few trips to a town for anything. This is a luxury of that socialist system. The movement behind the construction of a transcontinental superhighway started in the 1930s when President Franklin D. Roosevelt expressed interest in the construction of a network of toll superhighways that would provide more jobs for people in need of work during the Great Depression. The resulting legislation was the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1938, which directed the Chief Bureau of Public Roads to study the feasibility of a 6-route toll network. Now, after the war, President Dwight D. Eisenhower takes office January 1953. The state's only completed 6,500 miles. Eisenhower had first realized the value of good highways in 1919 when he participated in the U.S. Army's first transcontinental motor convoy from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, and again during World War II. Eisenhower saw the German advantage that resulted from their Autobahn highway network. how much more mobile it made the Allies, the role it played in national defense. He considered it important to protect the vital interest of every citizen in a safe and adequate highway system. But it had a secondary effect. It caused the suburbanization of this country. Here we go. Because of the 1956 law and subsequent Highway Act of 1958, the pattern of community development in America was fundamentally altered and was henceforth based on the automobile. In urban areas, massive superhighways cut through neighborhoods and destroyed housing, much of it in poor sections. Elsewhere, the new superhighways followed established railroad routes and so bypassed many small towns. While construction and routing of the National Transportation Network evolved in response to community and environmental concerns, the increased mobility Americans enjoyed as a result of this spurred substantial growth in interstate commerce and suburbanization over the next decade. You see, prior to 1956 and all this going down, you didn't have the ability to have a house in the country. They didn't exist. They didn't exist. And Patriot Nurse, this is her Patreon channel. Straight truth, we aren't American anymore. Because the costs of things are getting so high, people are being forced to double up, triple up. She even years ago tried to be a homesteader herself, to be self-sufficient. And she has a whole series of videos on how much work it takes and how you need so many people and how it's almost unsustainable. How people are spending more on taxes now than food, clothes, and medicine combined. See, this is a quirk. This is something the Founding Fathers would have never understood. A house way out, all by itself in the country, they would have said, how are you sustaining that? What do you plant? Where are your cattle? Where are the horses? Well, we just go to the grocery store. Oh, you mean you can go hop in the truck and go hop on an interstate and bop down the road 45 minutes and then go to a big commercial grocery store, fill up with a month's worth of stuff. Oh, that's right, and that socialist government that ran the electricity out here allows you to live out here as if you were living in the city or in the suburbs. They would have never got it. Here's another great example. This is The Guardian. Guns bought through credit cards in the U.S. will now be trackable. Well, the first thing our Founding Fathers would have said, what is this credit card you speak of? And some would have said, purchase? Why aren't patriots building their own handguns and rifles? Why aren't they just going down to the blacksmith and commissioning them? Why do they have to buy them pre-made? Oh, yeah, that's right. See, we don't live in that time anymore, where people lived in huge houses with families that were 10 and 12 and 15, where you had carpenters and blacksmiths and gunsmiths and all sorts of different skilled labor all working together, you know, like in a village. See, we're just doing the Middle Ages all over again. People did that. When they lived out by themselves, they became susceptible to brigands, and being so far out, you wasted all of your time transiting back and forth. And when it was horse and carriage, you had to feed that horse and you had to maintain that carriage. And without superhighways, it made a lot more sense for people to live just generally around a centralized village. Now, that concentrated wealth, it made things easier, but when the brigands got together in larger groups, it also made the take and the spoil a lot better. So then, history records, they went to this. A lot more protection. Brigands can't get through the moat and the wall, but whoever controls the gate controls everything else inside. And then that led to issues. So then there were these hybrids, where you have the castle, and you have the folks living inside the walls. And you had the moat, but then you had little towns that sprung up around outside. And you have, basically, the city and the suburbs of the Middle Ages. We're just doing it all over again. Without it being a working farm, without that super highway system, without that socialist highway system, you'd be lost. I know a lot of my audience says, I'm a prepper, I'm a survivalist, I have a place way out in the country. The reason you can survive out there is because of the highway system. If you have electricity run out there, think a socialist, basically. This idea, way out in the middle of nowhere, the founding fathers would have scratched their heads and wondered, what miracle of sorcery is this? Grass and lights and fences and people living here. How are they doing it? Now, here's the tie-in. You see, the reason they did it has changed. The reason people used to live out in the middle of nowhere has changed. The entire dynamic. Just like with this, 9 September 2022, a divorce trend that may reshape marriage forever. What am I doing? What am I tying in here? What's happening to America? Americans are doing it to themselves. What you need to know about gray divorces. This is going to stun a lot of people. Divorce rates for 50 to 70-year-olds are the highest they've been, having more than doubled since 1990. Pardon me. As financially independent people live into their 100s, many are taking their marriages off life support to pursue new dreams. Is it possible to prevent the demise of long-term love? Yes, but it can take an active effort to do so, of course. You see, this is something that a lot of people wouldn't get. You see, from our era, what was the promise of marriage for? Well, it was real simple. From my era and beyond, those of you who are younger may not get this. It was the only way you could be with somebody and not be assured you were going to be condemned to hell. If you wanted to take solace in anyone's arms for any reason, and you did not want the entire community pointing fingers at you and saying they're going to hell, have nothing to do with them, they're garbage, they're trash, they're fornicators, they're sinners, you had to get married. That's what it was all about. Now, if you're in your 40s or 30s, you might not get that. But those of us in our 50s and 60s and 70s, we get that. If you were with anyone you weren't married to, in any kind of a public way, everybody's going to hell. If you didn't have one of these little state-issued licenses to procreate, let me say this again. If you didn't have a state-issued license to procreate, you were persona non grata in polite society. I love to hear Americans and people who call themselves capitalists and Christians whine and moan about China controlling people's kids. The Christian church has been controlling people's birth rates, people's having kids, far longer than China. Far longer. Back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, try having a kid out of wedlock. That's where the term bastard comes from. They used to have all sorts of horrible names for men and women that had children but weren't married. But guess what? See, the jig's up. The jig's up. It's not infidelity that's driving the divorces. It's 50, 70-year-olds 50 to 60 and 70-year-olds pulling the plug on their dying relationships where, quote, I love you didn't end up meaning I'll do everything. Relationships that were on autopilot for decades are coming off life support. Financially independent 50-year-olds who expect to live into their hundreds are rethinking the game. And here's the hypocrisy of all hypocrisies. Those of you who love to preach about monogamy, thinking you know the first thing about the Bible, isn't that people are divorcing. It's that they've tolerated loveless and sexless, meaning godless, marriages for on average 6+ years before calling it quits. See, Corinthians 7:4, I've used to turn around and hit like a hammer back against Christians who love to use it, against people who don't go to the state and get licenses to have children. And said, wait a minute, are you honoring your Corinthians 7:4 duty, meaning your body is not your own? Your body is not your own? Who would be in a marriage where there was no intimacy for years and years and years? It's an abomination. The whole point of marriage, the entire point, was to have someone to gain some solace from, some release, and to have children. And if you're doing none of that, the marriage is a mockery. It's an abomination. It's a shell of what it was. You know, ironically, the primary reason people stay together these days is they can't figure out who would get the dog. They look at the dog and like, oh, we have to stay together for Fluffy, for Rover. But yet they talk about the sanctity of their marriage and how good Christians they are. Whatever happened to for better, for worse, for richer, for poor? I'll give you this article, by the way. In Sickness and in Health, many middle-aged and older adults are divorcing after decades of emotional needs being unmet. Oh, I guess that means oaths mean nothing. Oaths mean nothing. You mean oaths taken when you were 19 or 20 or 21? That should stick around and be honored when you're 89 and 90 and 91? Seems like a pretty big decision, doesn't it? But hey, if you're going to hell, you're in good company. Forrest Gump's mom, in order to give her son a better life, to give him a better education, had a one-night roll in the hay with the school headmaster. Clearly she's going to hell, so she'll be there. And then Amanda Rigetti, the character from Colony, whose son was dying because he couldn't get insulin. And so she found a guy who had the ability to get the insulin and romanced him and saved her son's life. Clearly, they're all going to hell because, of course, they weren't married. Any two people who have modified their relationship in any way, for any reason, to stay together, if it doesn't meet the approving eye of the Pharisees, the modern-day Laodicean church Pharisees, they're all going to hell too. Even older couples that perhaps do a little bit of something to still feel alive, they're going to hell too. Got hungry kids at home? Doing something that maybe might not be so savory or fun to feed the family? Going to hell. If you want to know why the world population is going to collapse, it's not some grand conspiracy theory from the Illuminati. Christians are going to do it to themselves. So-called self-professing, high-minded, haughty, arrogant, primarily American, European Christians are going to do it to themselves because of their assumptions. Because this is what they get up every morning hoping to do. Let's see if I can go to YouTube and correct somebody's grammar. Let's see if I can go see if somebody misquoted a date. Oh, maybe somebody showed an image that was a little revealing. Maybe a girl wore a top that was too tight, or a guy said something that wasn't quite so savory. Or even worse, two people engaged in activity that might actually result in a child. That's what we live for. That's what this country lives for. Find something to point the finger to make yourself feel better. And if you think I'm kidding, go look at the comment section of any large channels. Especially Patriot Nurse. She's been putting up with this for decades. I don't know how she still does it. Nitpick, that's all audiences do these days, here on YouTube and everywhere else. Nitpick, 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 point fingers, lay blame, and try to shame people. This is what they do. So whatever we got coming, look in the mirror. I'll leave it there. We'll have a more in-depth more in-depth dive into this over at Patreon. Would love to have you over there. $1 US per month, even less if you sign up for an entire year. Fully refundable. Up to 90 days. Lowest allowable level. God bless. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you guys next time.